Nice, very cool. Yeah, so typically, I know for me growing up, service trips or mission trips, we call them mission trips, but it very much became just like, helping out like after Hurricane Katrina or after, fill in the blank thing, right? And this, all of our efforts with OrphaNetwork in Nicaragua don't really fit that bill. So what they talk about a lot is there's a time and a place for humanitarian efforts and for coming in after a storm or coming in on emergency and supporting a service in that way. There's a time and a place for that. But the mentality for OrphaNetwork is especially based on the book When Helping Hurts. The idea that if we're really going to make a dent and alleviate poverty, they use the phrase breaking cycles of poverty. Right? If we're really going to make that happen, it doesn't just come in by going in and building a house. The best example is that 7 years ago, when we first went to Nicaragua, Alyssa and I, funny enough, a month later, my dad actually, with my brother, went to do like a Habitat for Humanity trip. And great experience. It was super great, super transformative. And he came back and said, it was awesome. It was so good to make a difference. But like, who's gonna help teach these moms, how to not get pregnant as teenagers without the father in the picture, or who's going to help them get jobs? Who's going to do this? So even he, after such a great immediate humanitarian experience, had this thought of like, all right, this can't be it. There has to be more. And that's what OrphaNetwork, especially as an organization, focuses on. We had the chance to just ask them tons of questions and see them in person of what their organization is all about. They are so constantly trying to like improve how they do what they do. And one of the biggest things is they recognize anywhere they're creating dependencies instead of actually making the problem better, or fixing, being a part of the solution, really. So some background on OrphaNetwork. I thought their verse was going to be like, when Jesus says, serving the least of these, right? Or like a green pastures type of like mission verse. But this is their verse, their passage. I will go before you and will level the mountains. I will break down gates of bronze and cut through bars of iron. I will give you hidden treasures, riches stored in secret places, so that you may know that I am the Lord, the God of Israel, who summons you by name. For the sake of Jacob, my servant, of Israel, my chosen, I summon you by name and bestow on you a title of honor, though you do not acknowledge me. I am the Lord, and there is no other. Apart from me, there is no God. I will strengthen you, though you have not acknowledged me, so that from the rising of the sun to the place of its setting, people may know that there is none besides me. I am the Lord, and there is no other. And it's so cool, because this is like a battle verse, right? And this is just a good indication that for the staff in OrphaNetwork, they recognize that this is an uphill battle. If they're going to break the cycles of poverty in a country of 7 to 8 million people, it's not going to happen overnight, and it's not going to happen without fervent prayer and effort and work and like ground up, roots up type effort and seeking God in that way. And some of the cool things we picked up when we did a devotional on this is the idea of, bestowing on you a title of honor. They focus so much, and Helping Hurts talks about this a lot too, and that poverty isn't just a lack of money. Really at its core, if you ask, if you go to third world countries, and they did all sorts of trying to understand the problem from their perspective, when they talk about poverty, they talk about a poverty of relationship, or they talk about poverty of identity and how people see themselves. And Mary, you served overseas, and I'm sure to a certain extent you saw that too, right? Of like, say it again. Poverty of opportunity is a real good word, yeah. And so a lot of what OrphaNetwork does from kid to adult is to help them understand their identity and their identity in Christ. One of the really neat examples they gave us when we asked is like, well, what do you do? They literally have one exercise where they show the kids their own reflection, right? And they walk through that exercise of what do you see? And more often than not, it's negative things, right? Or they don't necessarily even look in the mirror. They haven't looked in a mirror, right? Like in some cases. So it's developing this self-identity. They teach them to share their whole name, right? They teach them, just to have this healthy self-identity. And so this idea of summoning them by name and bestowing on a title of honor definitely stuck out to us. In other words, the hidden treasures, the riches stored in secret places is the people, the hearts, the kids, the parents. that they are hidden only from us, that God knows how special they are, and it's just a matter of unearthing that and helping them see that. So there's so much we loved about this passage, but I just thought that was a good kind of foundation. So some basic history on the organization, OrphaNetwork, 1N, that's going to throw you off the whole time. So it started as just a mission trip. Someone had connections and found out about this orphanage of 85 kids, and they were so compelled and so convicted that they said, no, we're coming back. We're going to do something about this. And they were like, all right, sure, great. But they literally left some of their stuff to say, like, no, we're coming back. So they brought more people from their church. This was college kids who went on this mission trip. And it started realizing, like, oh my gosh, there's a true need here. At that time, it was mostly kind of the malnourishment. The orphan isn't just parents who have passed away, but way too often, it's parents who didn't want their kid and just dropped them off at a doorstep, or literally moved to a different country, right? So they were just left without. Or they took them to the orphanages because they knew they could get a better life, right? So that was all the way back about 25 years ago, 24 years ago. At that point, it was focused mostly on the malnutrition, but it has since grown, how it started, how it's going. Picture the meme. So growing from that 24 years later, talking about over 4 million meals served annually, talking about serving over 20,000 kids regularly across Nicaragua. And their focus isn't just about malnutrition. It's about health, wellness, spiritual teaching, about self-efficacy, so developing, recognizing opportunities and training for how to care well for themselves, how to care well for their kids. In the case of moms, you're talking about breastfeeding, you're talking about preventative care, right? And preventing them from getting pregnant at the age of 13, 14. In these communities where they're focusing, elementary school through 5th grade is what they consider, was only 22% that they had finished. Now it's at 98%. Just imagine the opportunities coming from that. They serve over 1,200 moms, or at risk, I say, in terms of the women who are at risk of becoming pregnant without help. And as a very, very Christ-centered organization, they track the best they can the people who, through these churches, have decided to follow Christ, which is an insane and incredible number. That, again, they didn't just come in with, like, spiritual stuff or like, all right, we're going to save you. It's this combination of meeting physical, tangible, practical needs while also acknowledging that, like, true transformation in the individual and the community is only going to come through Christ. Now, all of this is navigating COVID. All of this is navigating just a really terrible government where they are so limited. 4 years ago, independent of COVID, the government shut down all orphanages across the country. Now, some of this was with perceived good intentions because they had said, like, well, orphanages create dependencies, so we're not going to do that. But they did nothing to support the displaced children and families, right? So OrphaNetwork stepped up the challenge and said, yeah, we primarily did serve through orphanages, but all the while they had been developing and really partnering with local churches. So now all of the effort, the 20,000 kids that they're serving, is all through local churches, right? Everything is back on the ownership of the church to be the hope for the community, to be the change for the community, to provide in the community. It's all through the local churches. So about 250 now, supporting those 20,000 kids, right? You're talking almost 1,000 kids per, which is crazy. Or what am I saying? 100 kids per, geez. Supported by only 20 churches domestically here, and their staff has grown, from 5 originally to now 110 people stateside and also in Nicaragua. So primarily the takeaway is so much that they focus on is ownership of being a part of the solution in Nicaragua and not just people from afar sending money, sending resources. They have in their facility so many examples of this, of really success stories of kids who have come up through their schools, come up through their after-school program, through their orphanages. And again, when you're starting with so many of these kids that literally just need to know their whole name, right? To know that they have value before they can even think about, I can do something that has impact in this world. I can be a journalist. I can be a newscaster. I can be a doctor, right? Before you can think about that, we take that for granted, right? We can ask our kids, what do you want to be? But for so many of these kids, it's not even a thought thinking past the day. So they have just a wall full of some of their success stories from the kids there. In terms of Horizon's involvement, there's some pretty cool history. Really, you're talking over 15 years. If you can identify some of the people in that picture, right? You see the Rogers, you see Jen, you see, if you remember, Ashley Smith, right? And then my favorite is the Gray Bills. Before they were actually at Horizon, were heavily involved. You see a very young Ryan Casey square in the middle, right? So Horizon has been sending for over 15 years now, partnering with Grace City just to be able to kind of increase our impact and to be able to streamline planning. So fast forward to this year, we hadn't been able to travel, and 7 years ago was the last time, and Alyssa and I got to go on that trip. Again, because COVID, because government instability, and the riots and everything. So this trip was intended to kind of reset on what's going on, to meet the communities that we're serving, specifically, especially as Horizon and Grace City, to kind of refresh relationship and picture, all right, if we start to go regularly, what would it look like to bring service trips there? Wanted to do some introductions, especially for anyone who gets the OrphaNetwork newsletters or wants to. This is Eddie Morales. He is the the Nicaraguan lead for OrphaNetwork. This guy is incredible. He used to work at the UN. He used to be like basically the second right-hand man to the current president, who, again, despite the government instabilities, he has so much favor on him to be where he was. And he was responsible for a Nicaraguan effort for like feeding in the country. He got hired by OrphaNetwork pretty early on. He resisted it. He said, no way, that's crazy. But God convicted him and said, there's nothing else I should do with my time and capacity. So this is just a simple example, though, of like one question we had is, what are we even going to do, right? Why is it worth us spending time and money to go? And guys, they take prayer so seriously. Like, it sounds so silly, but like before doing anything, they pray. Before considering like, we're going to fix Nicaragua, they pray, and they do not move unless God tells them, right? So any interaction we had, they said, can you guys pray for us? Like, yeah, okay. Not that our prayers had special power, but just how rooted they were in the necessity for prayer. Another name I have up there that's not shown is the woman responsible for overseeing the after-school program. Now, after school is important to recognize that school is only half a day for most of these kids, even all the way up through high school. So what that means is a lot of these high schoolers with nothing better to do in the afternoon, usually not a recipe for success, right? So they've put so much effort in their after-school program to make sure that these kids have somewhere to be and somewhere that they can continue to learn and be supported all through the day. Her name is Maria Luisa, and the one thing I want to share about her is that the half hour that she spent with us, the entire time, she looked like she was ready to cry. Like, these people are so invested, and they could be doing so many other things. They come with so much experience, but more than anything else, deep compassion. The entire time, she was just her heart welling up for the work that God is doing and that she gets to be a part of there. So the team that we support, the question is, yes, why, there's poverty here. Why go to Nicaragua? Well, there's an amazing organization doing great things, making huge changes, and we know how to support them. One other person introduced from OrphaNetwork is a woman named Ana. Now, she is one of the success stories, and we got to travel a lot with her. Now, I speak broken Spanish, so I had the chance to really connect with her. But she was in one of the communities where there was a need. The pastor in that area actually moved to that area after praying to realize, all right, there's a need here. She was in that community and pretty early on became one of the regular volunteers. But she, as a girl, had already had, I say girl, I mean young woman, already had kids, very young, early teens. But that didn't stop her from dreaming. She saw the church come in, and when they started to partner with OrphaNetwork, OrphaNetwork said, all right, we see what you guys are doing, but we need to know if you're in it. We need to know if you're legit. How long would it take to raise the necessary funds on your end? And they said, I don't know, maybe 4 months. So the whole town got together, and within 3 weeks, they raised the funding by selling soup, by serving any way they can, because they wanted to see transformation in their community. So Anna became a volunteer early on, whatever they need, got to know the OrphaNetwork staff, learned how to read, learned how to clean, started working in the OrphaNetwork facility cleaning, and she told them, one day I want to go out with you guys to these communities just like you did for me. So fast forward, she went to school to become a nurse, and now she's going and she's the one giving classes on lactation and classes on early childhood development. Moms come up to her and say, I've never gotten my kid to be able to do that. And she's just beaming at the excitement of that. So she is one of those success stories of never thought anything could have come from her life, had kids way too young without help from any man, and yet through opportunities presented stateside through the local church, seeing transformation in her life. One of the other organizations down there is called Mission 14. They are a sewing training facility. They started 15 years ago. You can see the 2 machines there. Fast forward now, and some of those stats were just showing like they keep track of this, right? From the sewing courses they have, and now the mechanics courses they have. They have a 90% completion rate. 75% of them go out and get jobs. One of those dependencies they found was that they tried originally having them sell stuff there, but they found that even that was creating dependencies because it was like a fast cash sort of thing, and the women kind of disappeared or were under pressure from their significant others. So fast forward to today, fully fledged sewing shop, but even more, they have this mechanic shop. So the really cool story, I mentioned how hard it is to work with the government there. They had started to do such good work in training the people to sew that the government organization that they kind of funneled people into work said, hey, you guys are doing great things. We're sick of outsourcing our mechanic work. Can you develop a course to train mechanics? I said, sure, we can try to figure that out. So they got connected with the right people, developed a course. Isaac, can you stop that, please? Thanks, buddy. Developed a course to enable even more opportunities, because one thing that gets even more money than sewing is fixing the sewing machines and working in those facilities where the government requested them. And this is men and women, which is awesome, right, to see them both. So again, now you're seeing the government that has been such a source of challenge try to work with them, seeing what God is doing through our organization. So over the course of 10 years, they've had over 1,000 people go through these programs and land jobs. And they have they have 3 full-time folks who monitor the vetting through those local churches and say, all right, who are the people you think are actually going to stick? We're not just going to train people if they're going to be flaky. They were able to reduce the threshold. In other words, they originally said they have to graduate high school, but remember those statistics weren't good, so they were not getting opportunities for everyone. They were able to train them up to do whatever they needed to do to be proficient enough serving there. And then they have someone full-time on the back end for retention, for life skills, for budgeting, for all this sort of stuff to make sure that these people who now are making money know how to spend it, know how to maintain it. So that's Mission 14. All right, so while we were there, we went to 3 different towns. So Horizon Church supports through our funding, through our giving. We support in 3 different areas, 4 to 5 different church initiatives down there. One of them it's called Club Cristiano La Esperanza. It started as an after-school program. One of the things with that, along the lines of those dependencies, Ryan has mentioned this in a sermon, but the Queen of Spain found out about the fact that in this community, people were literally living in the dump. And I'll show a picture later of what that looked like. Don't picture our dump, picture the just absolute most disgusting environment you can imagine. They were living in the dump, scavenging for food, and also anything they could find to sell, to recycle, to try to make some money. She came in and said, this is terrible, this is disgusting. Spain paid for housing just outside La Chirica, and they shut it down. What they found is that people still brought the dump with them, right? If you drove by these houses, they had trash inside the house, and a lot of them didn't even live in the houses, they lived outside them. So didn't solve the problem, and if anything, in some cases made it worse because this church that was in the dump got kicked out and had nowhere to meet. So praise God, after 2 weeks of praying, they found an old building that was so covered up in overgrowth right outside the dump, renovated it, and over years and years and years made it into this incredible and beautiful facility that's clean and a place for these kids to be. They started it as an after-school program, developed it into a church to be able to partner officially with OrphaNetwork. And you can see on the far left, Shayla and Roberto are the pastors there, husband and wife. So they just do incredible things there in this Club Cristiano La Esperanza. They are kind of the most mature, and you can see as we go along that it gets a little, like everyone's aspiring to get to that point of self-sufficiency and of kind of the full suite of opportunities. Again, at that facility, they offer the feeding programs. They offer the prenatal training. They do kind of health checkups for pregnant moms. They do all those sorts of things there. They have school. They have after school. They have church. It's like the full suite. So going to this community called Nueva Vida, which is in an area called Villa Guadalupe, this is another example of their church or their facility, right? So very different in terms of kind of cleanliness or kind of the resources they have available. They walked us through an example class where they saw us with our bottles of water and kept saying, hey, when you're done with that, can you give us those bottle caps? Like, okay, sure. They use the bottle caps. They write on them. They use them for counting. They use them for teaching the kids, especially in the after-school program. They'll put letters on them. They'll do training like that. So they really make the most of anything they have. And you can, again, see that they are thankful for a roof. They were bragging to God, or bragging about God adding this space on the right where they have class, because originally it was the space on the left, which you can't tell, but it's just kind of before that. So in this community, there is a pastor named Victoriano. He is on the left. Older, heavy-set man, super meek, super humble. When one of our guys asked him, how did you know God was calling you? This is the community where that gal Anna was from. How did you know God was calling you to this community of all places? What was it like to hear God's voice? He said, well, when I heard God's voice, I just felt so small. Like, what am I going to possibly do for this community? And it started small. In this part of their church on the left, again, it looks really nice. It started as a literal, 12 by 12 foot cutout that was just a literal hole in the wall where he would stand and the church would be in the alley. And again, they raised funds. They gathered resources from the community to expand it to be kind of this full length where they can fit, 60 inside and then whoever else wants to come outside in the alleys. So again, this meek, kind of humble, quiet Victoriano. Well, we went across the town to check out another church, and that's the one on the right. The pastor there, his name is Dennis. This guy was a fireball in a totally different denomination than Victoriano. But the really cool thing that was our takeaway is they saw how huge the need was and worked through some pretty crazy differences just to focus on bringing about what God wanted to do in that community. So as Ryan shared about, Patrick and St. Barnabas and wanting to partner with them, it was just such a refreshing, encouraging reminder of the importance of partnership, especially in taking on such big challenges. But on the church on the right, they were in their school. They had developed kind of this talent show. They wanted to show us all the things they had learned. There was a girl who danced. There was a girl who sang. There was a boy who read a story, and just all sorts of stuff like that, just to show off, what they were learning and experiencing. So again, I mentioned kind of worse and worse as the week went on. This is Tipi Tapa. So this is one example of one of those garbage dump communities. Now you can't fully see it, but there are buzzards, vultures, in the dump. Right next to them, 20 feet away, are people working, trying to find whatever they can get. we found out that they, on average, make, this is shocking, they make 90 cents a day just to get by. Like unfathomable. And they do whatever they have to do to make that happen. So there's just countless numbers of people working next to these vultures, whatever they can find to make money to support their family. So again, how do you look at a community like that and think God can transform this into more of the community we saw in the first place, where there's a healthy community, there's ownership, there's business, there's this and that? Well, same thing. It starts with the vision and prayer for someone who is willing to serve. We met this is one example of just kind of some of the houses. It's really hard to describe what these houses are like. There's another picture later. But so this is the team in Tippy Tapa, and they were just, again, blown away telling us their story. Pastor Marcos is on the left and his wife on the right. I think it's Maria Jose. They shared the really vulnerable story of, again, God, someone needs to do something. Someone needs to do something. And God convicting Marcos that it was them. And his wife just had that battle of months of like, man, this is crazy. What are we doing? And ultimately, God gave him a vision of a field of flowers in the place where there was that dump, right? It's beautiful wildflowers. And God revealed to him that, like, these are the kids that I'm going to raise up in here. What was really cool about that story is, again, with my broken Spanish, there was a girl with a flower in her hair, and this is before we had heard this story, but I kept calling her like Florecita, which is like little flower. And so it was such a cool like confirmation of like, I saw her as this cute little flower. He got this vision of God seeing all these kids as these beautiful, beautiful flowers and the opportunity there. Even though, again, you look over and it's just this giant community, giant garbage dump. So in all these communities, we got to hear these stories of transformation individually, and also of the community. We heard about stories of parents who said, you know what? You can take my child out of the after-school program because they're doing really well. Let someone else go in that program so that they can get the benefit of it. You heard about adults who learned how to read, and they became volunteers in the community. One of the examples, I was asking Marcos, because I was like, you guys came from outside of the town. Were they hostile to you at all, right? Did they think you're coming in and like, what does this guy know? Literally, as I finished that sentence, this group of guys comes by and go like, Marcos, what's up, man? Like so excited for the church's presence in that town. So everywhere we saw not just this cool transformation individually, but the church being responsible, God being responsible through the church for the transformation of that community. We saw businesses starting to spring up. Like in this town and in Nueva Vida, they just shook their heads and said, man, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, we couldn't walk like this. We would, even not just us as Americans, but like people didn't walk around for fear of getting mugged. But he says now we can just walk around, right? I mean, it's just things like that, just seeing God transform the communities to a place where they see their potential and get to experience it. As we went to each of these towns, we had the chance to do these home visits and meet some of the people in these communities. So this was extremely challenging for kind of a variety of reasons. Do I have the other one? I do. In some cases, it was just really dire. In other cases, they were celebrating, wow, I have a house and this happened, whatever. The guy on the left, I forget his name, the kid's name was Danielle. He described every day going to market with his two oldest sons, buying plantains, showing us how he fries the plantains to go sell them in the market to make money. And you could just hear the combination of, there's a little bit of pride in, you know what, I'm providing for my family, but also the, man, I wish I could do more for them. But he said, at the end of the day, all I can do is be there for them. I was like, man, that's so profound, you don't even know. But there's 6 kids in a house that is, I mean, probably out to like that table, right? Just squeezed in there, just whatever they can do to make a living. On the right, there was a malnourished child, and this was just an example of, in some of the houses we go, you imagine there's got to be so much shame, right? Or there's this challenge of, I wish I didn't need this. We would go and we would bring them goods. We would pray for them. We would hear their story. But you could just see the level of caring. This is one of the nurses from OrphaNetwork. You could see the heart, but also the trust that community has with the OrphaNetwork staff. This is another home visit. On the left is actually kind of a more rare house because most of them don't have wood, but it does give you a sense of the size. This picture is taken from the front door, and all the lighting is just from the natural lighting. So in this case, it's a family of 4. They have 2 kids with Down syndrome, and the husband had an accident at work, has like cerebral palsy, or we couldn't fully understand, but something that literally has left him paralyzed. And if it were not for OrphaNetwork, if it were not for the community of believers coming up around this woman, helping provide money, helping provide support when she goes out and tries to find work, they would be hopeless. But on the right, another family, they were just so ecstatic at the fact that the boy shown in the picture was not supposed to live as a baby. And again, they helped him with the resources. They took care of her in her pregnancy. They made sure all the levels were okay. They followed up, got him the nutrition that he needed. And eventually to the point where this kid, Matthias, was so excited hearing his story, hearing his mom talk about how special he is, hearing his mom call him a leader, hearing his mom see the potential in him that she only got to see, 1, because he is alive through the support of OrphaNetwork, but 2, because of how much they reinforce her value, his value, even though, again, she was a young pregnant mom. He was such a good example of, we're standing there talking, nobody told him to, he just kept bringing over chairs for us. And when he saw we weren't sitting in him, he said, fine, I'll sit. But it was just that sort of thing of like, there were several kids like that who, I'll share that one. So these are just kind of some of the examples, and there's just so many stories and so many ways that we got to see God at work in the communities. I'm going to move on to the kind of like what now or what can I do sort of thing. But I did want to stop if there's any questions specifically about like what we got to experience or what OrphaNetwork does. Shout it out if you got it. Yeah, good question. I mean, it's resources. It's just kind of their standard instead of having full day school. I'd imagine it's just because of like paying the teachers, honestly, and having enough teachers. Really good. Yeah, really good question. So in the case of like this one, this is actually just an after-school program. So you can see they have a classroom set up. And what other pictures I had that didn't show, again, they use bottle caps. They have like a giant board that looks like Twister. And they have numbers, they have shapes, and they'll do games. They do such a focus on learning by play, which, we can do the same thing here, but they do such a good job of that. One of the things that stood out to me is all of their kind of teaching apparatuses, whatever, are old pizza boxes, right? And on the other side, they just kind of color it, paint it, whatever. So they make the best of what they can do, and they reinforce. The person who's on staff with OrphaNetwork there was a teacher and is very much wrapped into what they're teaching to be able to reinforce it. So that's a good question. What else? Any other questions so far? No, that's a really good question. They are providing the infrastructure, in some cases the people. They can't go to every single one of them, but especially in helping them get started, it's kind of like the we do, you watch, you do, we watch, and then you do type approach. They are, it's amazing. The number they gave us is, right now it's like $288 to support a child for a whole year to make sure that they can go through these like after school programs or whatever. And they're like, we know we can get that down to $200 a year by training up people to volunteer. And we got to meet one of those volunteers. And she is just, again, like so excited to get to have a purpose, right? To get to be part of the solution for her town and for her family. Yeah, so that's a good question. It's not just here's the money and they send off. When we went to Tippy Tapa, which is the one with Marcos, Eddie Morales, again, the leader of OrphaNetwork, a guy who worked for the president, a guy who worked in the United Nations. He was there, right, in this community, and they recognize him. He's there often enough, right? So there's a full investment in that balance of equipping them enough without having to be dependent on them, which makes sense, if that makes sense. No, that's nationwide. And so it's amazing. That was really surprising to us for like how much they're doing through just our 20 churches of support. There are some individual givers who give pretty substantially, apparently. But primarily, so this started from college students from Virginia Tech. So based in Virginia Beach, and then kind of went out from there. I think it was Chris McDonald, so Steve and Beth's son, who first went from our church and said, we got to do something about this, but I might be getting that wrong. So it's mostly Virginia, us here in Maryland, and then there's a couple churches in like Florida or something. It's not a lot of U.S. support, and they're trying to grow that. So that's why they're doing a whole lot more of marketing. They had a switch in CEO. His time was kind of up. He did his thing. The first CEO focused a lot more on like fundraising to get them going. And then this CEO, Bob Cleary, is a lot more focused on marketing. So exactly that reason of raising awareness, getting more partnerships. COVID really messed that up, right? Because it's a lot harder to go and support or to support a mission that you don't get to go to. So now that they're having trips more often, they're trying to get more churches on board. Good question. Yeah, I will. That's a good question. I'll hold that thought. Yeah. Anything else? What else? I'm looking to see if there's other like important stuff I really want to say. Hugged like enormously by kids and adults. The kids would run up and hug us. The adults didn't run up and hug us. But there's so much love. And like When Helping Hurts talks about this a lot, and I think Mary had to step out, but I know that was something that was really important in the work that she did, is like there's this sort of like saviorism, this American just outsider saviorism that we don't want to be part of. And OrphaNetwork doesn't want that. And they've described how obviously that can be detrimental, not helpful. And yet there is so much love. Again, they don't look at us as like the ones who have answers, right? The ones who have whatever, but we're just ones who go. Like we are a 1,500-mile love letter from God, right? That like somebody here is actively praying for you and cares about you, right? Like Anna is such a great story because as a young woman with 2 kids, there's never this thought of I can do something, I can have value, I can have impact. And yet, here we are thousands of miles away, and she has encouraged me, her story has encouraged me, having a global impact instead of just even the thought of having her own life. So I totally went away from your question. Did I answer it or no? Okay, I honestly forgot. I got excited thinking about Anna. What other questions? These are great. One of the other things that I thought was helpful to mention was where is it? Is it gone forever? Nope, gone out of my mind. Not that important. Good question. Yeah. So technically, OrphaNetwork is based in Virginia Beach, but it's a staff of like 5 or 10. The vast majority are in Nicaragua, and actually super cool. They are. This is bury the lead. But when we met with Eddie, he was so excited because they're actually launching in Guatemala now. Yeah. So what's super cool about that is, and really humbling, is they did a deep dive into their history as OrphaNetwork and said, all right, let's look at this in the phases, the beginning, the pre-COVID, and the post-COVID. Like, what are the lessons learned? How do we do this well right from the start? And even they, where Nicaragua used to be the most malnourished country, now Guatemala is, not just because of their efforts, right? I don't know how that worked, but they recognized they could have the potential to be kind of the saviorism of to come in and be like, all right, we're going to do things this way because it worked in Nicaragua. And again, having the humility to recognize that, like, nope, that's not always how it works. We have to go understand the people. We have to make sure it can actually take root in Guatemala. We need staff in Guatemala. So they are doing a whole lot to do that. And it really reinforces that idea of like, no, we can't solve someone else's problem. They need to be responsible for owning it. So good question. All right, there will be more opportunities for questions, but for the sake of time, I will keep going. Oops, skip ahead. Oh, sorry, one other thing. So this is a good example, right? As much as we might complain about our church and technical stuff, this is their church. And I don't know if you can even tell how far back it goes, but they cram 150 people in and around this building. And again, same thing. They told a story of God coming through and God providing a roof and God providing a bathroom, which right now is just like an outhouse in this area where you have to like dump the water to just wash out whatever you did instead of, there's no plumbing. And in this community where we're working with them, we were teaching them how to wash their hands, right? So again, things that are very, very basic for us that just obviously not so much in some of these communities. All right. So to the question of the what now, getting involved. So what I tell people, and it feels super underwhelming because it probably says something about us and our mindset and our mentality, but the number one thing they ask for is prayer, right? They'll pray for us, like, okay, but really, like, no, seriously, like, pray. Pray for God to move in big ways in these communities. Now, these are just a sample, right? They're all over Nicaragua. Like I said, 250 churches. These were just 4 that we went to. But these are the ones that specifically they want us to be in relationship with. So prayer also helps support the relationship. So that's kind of key to them. Awareness is another huge one. Not just like awareness of the problem, but again, in relationship, to be able to get weekly newsletters. So for example, the week we were back, the OrphaNetwork-wide communication was about Pastor Marcos and about his story about the wildflowers, right? And we're like, we know him, we met him, right? So it's harder if you don't get to go, but getting to hear stories, getting to see pictures is another way to kind of have that awareness and relationship and understanding of what's going on. There's an opportunity for weekly newsletters for anyone who's interested. And then also, we're going to get updates within our leadership. So if people are more interested, we could support that too. Financially, obviously, they do need money and support that. A good portion of our giving at Horizon goes to OrphaNetwork. So opportunities would be continuing to support or support more at Horizon or give directly through OrphaNetwork. Now, that used to be you could sponsor a child in an orphanage, but because those are closed down, that's not the case. You can still sponsor, and it sponsors a child in the after-school programs. So that is an opportunity. And then lastly would be to go. So we're trying to get, Grace City went twice a year most years, and Horizon jumped on like one of those just to meet the threshold of like 6 to 10 people. The service trips would look more like doing, and it would look like going to 2 of those churches and communities for, the trip would be probably 5 or 6 days, and we would spend 2 days each in those communities. It would look like, picture, I forgot I did this. It would look like literally serving the food, right? Because all of these local churches, they have after school, they have churches, but they also have feeding programs still to meet the physical needs. So it looks like literally serving, right? And again, like, they don't need us, right? They're doing fine. But it was so fun in so many of these areas. These old ladies would like laugh at us the ways we like would mess up, or they would just like keep doing this, like kick back, relax, that type of look of like, oh, I'll take a break. So it really is a shot in the arm for them, for us, and for other churches to come and just kind of relieve them for a little bit. And then it looks like interacting with kids, even if you don't speak Spanish. I had the fortune of pretending to speak Spanish with these kids and understand them, and they understood me well enough. And so many hugs and so many smiles. It also looks like, depending on who's going, utilizing whatever skill sets we have. So one year we had a bunch of teachers go, which is very common here. And so they went in and helped teach a class. Now, they were super humbled, right? Because again, like, they're coming from here where we have so many resources, and even then the kids don't know what they have, and they struggle to keep kids captive, right? And instead they're using bottle caps and like fake puppets and whatever. So it was a humbling experience for the teachers who went, but also extremely memorable, right? Because think about if someone comes in and teaches, you're going to remember that as a child in Nicaragua, like, oh my gosh, this person came all the way to teach me. It wasn't very good, but they care about me. So teachers, if we have healthcare professionals, they can help kind of support and encourage and review and give suggestions, whatever, to the stuff they're doing. Musicians, sure, whatever. Child psychologists, very specific, but like 1 year we had that, and they wound up meeting with the staff who was like, man, we just don't know what to do with this child. We don't know what we're going to do. Just suggestions, advice. So much of it is this question of like, I don't know what I have to give. And the answer may very well be like, you don't have that much to give, or like, I don't speak Spanish. Is my on now? Don't tell me it just come out. Oh, worst possible time. So close. Yeah, go ahead and advance it. But again, I was fortunate enough to get to speak Spanish enough. But one of my favorite stories, that's weird. Did it just like freeze? Funny. Thank you. I love this sequence of pictures because, again, this is me trying to speak Spanish. And you can see the picture on the left, and then she's, like, laughing at me, right? Like, oh, all right, buddy, all right. But who cares? I don't care if they're laughing at me. They're laughing. They're experiencing joy. They taught me, like, a patty cake game, and they kept making fun of me, and it was just such a joy. And the little girl who's looking at me intently wouldn't leave my side, and I just felt so spoiled. Again, I went and felt loved. Like, that's not how it's supposed to work. And she came up again. She kept bringing us chairs. She took a bite of her cookie and then like broke off a tiny piece and like tried to give it to me. Right? It's just like you can, if nothing else, even if I don't do anything for them, it's an opportunity for them to receive love, but even to be love, which obviously we talk about at Horizon a lot. Okay, it works now. Thank you, Angie. And then this was the last picture, my favorite picture of the trip. So this is Dave. Dave is from Grace City, doesn't speak a lick of Spanish, but you can see that didn't stop him, right? Like this is us teaching them how to wash their hands, and this is him every time he would just, just ruffle her hands, right? Just something silly, and didn't have to speak to her to just bring like so much joy, right? To make hand washing this joyful experience, right? It's so simple, and to think like, I'm going to travel 1,500 miles for that, like absolutely. If it means someone, a child, a mom, OrphaNetwork staff, a pastor, knowing how loved they are and how behind them we are and how much God sees what they're doing, oh my gosh, absolutely. I will go and wash hands. I will go and pray. I will go and pretend to speak Spanish. I will go and do skits is another thing they ask us to do. I will go and sing songs. I will do whatever I need to do to show them that they are loved. So that's the roundabout answer to your question. The service trip can take on different forms. It might be serving the staff. It might be serving the kids. It might be serving the parents. But it's just kind of putting ourselves out there and saying, listen, whatever we can do to serve you, we will. So, yeah. So, open up for any more questions. There's obviously more stories. Any other questions? Money. Heck yeah. Yeah. I'd have to ask our bookkeeper. Yeah. That's interesting. Hmm. Yeah, that's a really good thought. I'll have to talk to the bookkeeper about that and see what we can do. Let me note that. Yeah. 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 That's a good note, Christina. Thank you. I kind of think so, right? You tell him to stop. You can tell him to stop. Isaac, please. Shh. Any other questions? Any other questions? Good question. So it depends on the number going. For this one, it was last minute. So flights cost $850 plus all the costs for being on site. So it was $1,600. Now, as a church, we have money set aside to help support. And as we increase the number of people, it would reduce the number of costs. And then we also have ways to help fundraise. So the first time Alyssa and I went, we fundraised a little bit of money to help support that. This time, since it was so last minute, we didn't do that. But cost, I would say we would make sure that cost isn't a hindrance for anyone. Good question. What else? Anything else? Really good question. So I asked, there's technically no age limit. You have to, as adults, you have to be extremely flexible, right? And you're going to really bad places and terrible, by our standards, hygiene, and you just have to be willing and able to handle that. Isaac, on the phone, he was like, can I come? Can I go next year? I was like, no, not next year, buddy. But it's definitely my goal to like work him up to that. So one of the things that I'd like to do as a church is do like a somewhat local experience with kids, right? Or at least have opportunities to be able to test it out, right? Of like, all right, well, can my child handle this with me, right? Before I just take them to a third world country. So I did ask that question though, and they said, technically, no, we would just ask you to use your judgment so that it's a blessing and not something that's constantly something that's going to hold you back. Good question. Good question. No, good question. They used to stay in the orphanages. So if you hear stories from way back when, they'll shake their head of like, man, just really, really bad accommodations. But we did ask that, and they anticipate using the hotel where we stayed, which is, it's like a 2-star by our standards, like a Super 8, basically, in Managua. And then you'll drive like half hour to different places every day. Good questions. Any other questions? Yeah, no. We did ask that. It tends to be a bit harder to coordinate. Even bringing them on site, it was kind of hard to figure out how and when and who to give them to. And in some cases, it helps them more to like be able to decide for themselves where the money goes. Because that was definitely my overzealous, like, I want to do all this stuff. Is like, well, just don't go crazy. So in terms of giving, it does help more just straight financial giving. Good question. Yeah. Yes. So good question. Yeah. So we brought, I brought like beach balls, and we brought like coloring books, and we brought stuff like that maybe they wouldn't necessarily get otherwise, and it was special to them without being like extravagant, right? So that sort of thing. And we also had the kids write letters or do drawings, and that was really special to be able to give them to the kids. So whenever it comes time to travel, we're going to provide more opportunities for that, for sure. Any last questions? You guys can always follow up later, but. Lovely. The last thought to wrap all this up. Again, this is my new friend, Dave. He was going through some really rough stuff in his life. And he wound up describing this trip as the best week of his life because it was just so profound in him realizing kind of a new layer of his faith. He had, without sharing too much, he just realized he'd never actually trusted Christ and like made the decision to on this trip, right? So yes, we're going and hopefully loving and serving and rejuvenating the staff and the pastors. and the kids and the young moms or moms to be, or hopefully, the moms who are learning how to make money for themselves. All those people, we're hoping to love and support them, but at the same time, it is just undeniable the impact it would have to be able to go on you and your faith. So when the time comes up in April and or August of the coming year, we're going to solidify those dates. Be on the lookout for that. Let me know if you're interested, and if you want more info to be part of like the weekly newsletter, for example. I'm going to pray to wrap up our time, and we'll be off. God, thank you so much for what you were doing in Nicaragua and now Guatemala. And here, God, the encouragement we receive through what you're doing and through who you are and who you continue to prove yourself to be, that there is no mountain too big, no battle, no challenge that you don't want to send your people to say, yes, those walls can come down, that mountain can move, and we are going to break the cycles of poverty. Thank you for the fruit that we've been able to see and experience. We know you're doing even more. We just pray for the encouragement and support of the local staff through OrphaNetwork, for the pastors there, the volunteers who are trying to support, the families, the kids who are learning more about who you are, that they would learn to trust you and make that decision to follow you as they learn how to read and how to work jobs and how to provide for themselves and their future families. So God, thank you for the opportunity just to be part of what you're doing in such a big way. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Thank you to everyone here. If you guys have questions, obviously follow up later, but have a good day.